Thank you so much for tuning into my show, William Wallace for America. In today's episode, it's going to be not so much a part two, because as you know from yesterday, we had Daniel Erspamer on with the Pelican Institute talking about more about things that are coming up, what they kind of do in general. But today, in this episode, is my guest, Sarah Harbison, and she is going to be discussing some things that she is specifically working on with the Pelican Institute. As I always say, while they are based in Louisiana, doing things in Louisiana, their effects of what they're working on actually end up being a nationwide issue for everybody. Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time.
Hey, good morning. Happy New Year. Happy to be with you.
Yeah, I know it's funny because we're a little bit past a week, and I always kind of jokingly say, are we still saying Happy New Year? And you don't see somebody, and so I guess if in June I see somebody, I can say, hey, Happy New Year, because we're technically in the new year if I haven't seen them in maybe 7 months. Is that right?
It's still new. I'm still trying to write 26 on my dates. Anything I have to date, I'm still struggling with the 26. But here we are. It's new. I'll get used to it, and lots of great things in store. So I'm excited.
Well, speaking of 26, let's talk about what you guys are working on in 26. But I will make a joke though. You talk about you're still probably actually writing 2025 on some things, but there are some things in 2025 that Pelican was working on that you're still going to be carrying over into 2026 also, right?
That's right. There's some unfinished business that there are ongoing. It's an ongoing problem that still in Louisiana we still don't have some of these labor reforms that other states have passed, like Florida a few years ago, did a really remarkable job reining in the power of government labor unions and making sure that people could join or not join, making sure that they or the ones, public employees, had control over their paychecks.
What I like when I hear about when I talk about about labor unions with the Pelican Institute is that you all aren't as much anti-labor unions as much as you are people, freedoms of people who either want to be in a labor union or not be in a labor union. You want to make it their choice, not mandated. Am I hearing those things correctly?
Absolutely. Freedom of association, very important to us. One of the first cases, the very first case we filed when we started the Center for Justice, was piggybacking off of the voluntary association issue. We sued the Louisiana State Bar Association over their requirement that in order to practice law, you had to join and pay dues to the Louisiana State Bar Association. And at the time, the Bar Association was taking bar member dues, hiring a lobbyist, and sending somebody to Baton Rouge to lobby for or against bills that had absolutely nothing to do with the practice of law or regulating lawyers as lawyers. Our plaintiff, Randy Boudreaux, he really took issue with the fact that the Bar Association took a position on tort reform. They were anti-tort reform. Really, the Bar Association is 50-50, so you're going to upset at least half your members.
Right.
He was upset that they were taking positions on oyster leases, of all things. They were supporting eliminating the free enterprise curriculum in high schools as part of the civics and free enterprise curriculum. Why would a bar association be concerned about that? And as somebody who is concerned and does a lot of work about free enterprise and free markets, that's something that I certainly didn't like.
Right.
So we're join, don't join, that's up to you. But if you are requiring somebody to be a member and you are taking their money and you are speaking on their behalf, the founders of this nation found that to be absolutely repugnant. And that's something that we're still seeing going on with government unions, particularly teachers unions today.
Then this is really interesting to me. I'm still trying to get past that oysters have rights. Look, I mean, were these lobbyists arguing that the oysters have constitutional protection? I know it's a bad joke. I get it.
It was oyster leases,
right.
And that is just something that maybe somebody in Plaquemines Parish could weigh in on. But it's, as a lawyer who doesn't deal in land use, I guess. I mean, I'm really stretching it here.
So Well, let's talk about what that legislation would look like. What,
Sure.
because let's because not only does Pelican Institute create the policy, what I like is that you're an open-minded group. You don't just say, "Hey, this is the ideas of the individuals working in the institute." You all bring in other think tanks. You bring in other organizations from around the country that you all help create this policy with. And maybe I'm being a little bit too generalized on it, but from what I have witnessed at the summit that you all have
Mhm.
every year, you all bring in speakers to speak on these individual topics. So I know that you all kind of work collaboratively with other groups in other states, and then you all kind of create a policy here, and then you go to the legislative session with it. Can we talk about what that policy with this labor union would look like?
Absolutely. As you know, states are considered to be the laboratories of democracy. So we really do work hard to take notes about what's worked, what hasn't worked in other states that have tried this before. We've worked very closely with the Institute for the American Worker, Vinny Vernuccio, who's done he's been at Solution Summit. He did a continuing legal education course with us. David Osborne at the Commonwealth Institute. He is an expert on government unions. He's got a great podcast if you're interested. It's called Disunion, where he talks about those types of issues. So we really do make an effort to learn about what's worked in other places, what hasn't worked, and take those lessons to heart as we bring them here. And one of the things that we know works really well in other states that have tried it is something called opt-in. And that means that if you are a member of a government union, so a teachers union, a city union, or I think New Orleans is one of the cities, transportation union, you have to opt in. You have to affirmatively consent to joining every year. So every year your membership would be and this would take effect after any existing collective bargaining agreements expire. So we're not interfering with any existing agreements. Your membership on an anniversary date, or the same date for everyone, ideally, maybe let's call it September 1st, just for ease of our conversation.
Government, the government fiscal year.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, your membership ends August 31st, September 1st. You say, yes, I want to be a member, or no, I don't want to be a member. And something that you're going to be informed of as you are considering whether or not you want to be a member is that you are going to pay your dues to this organization. That organization is going to speak on your behalf. They may say things that you don't like. And if you hear something that you don't want to pay for, you can also withdraw, stop paying your dues, end your membership at any time. One of the problems that we see with these collective bargaining agreements is that they have very narrow drop windows. So, for example, with teachers, in some cases, their drop window is 10 days from the start of school, or September 15th of every year. And we know what's going on 10 days at the start of school is you're getting your classroom ready. You might be preparing your family. So it's not an ideal time. It's pretty busy. It might not be one of the first things on your mind is to resign your union membership. So it's also very unclear how much these dues are. We can kind of have an idea maybe locally what teachers pay, but overall, I couldn't put a number on it because they're very opaque about that information, as you can imagine. But if your circumstances change in the middle of the year, your spouse loses his or her job, you have some unexpected medical expenses, or you just don't see that you're getting a benefit from your membership and you just want out, then you should be able to resign at any time. And that's something that this bill would allow that doesn't currently exist.
So I'm going to go back a little bit. So right now, am I hearing that the labor unions have such a lock within certain organizations or certain departments, or in this case, education department, I'll say, they have such a lock in there that people have to be, that they can say, hey, to work here, you have to be a member of the union, and you all are merely trying to create a legislation that says, no, somebody can work within this realm, we'll say, and not join. Do they have that much of a lock on it?
Well, you can't force someone to be a member as a condition of your employment. The problem that we see is that they make it very difficult to leave. And
Okay.
something
Once you're a
that
member of the family, you cannot.
you can't, blood in, blood out.
Right. Right.
And something that we're seeing, and if you check out social media pages, if you follow any of the national organizations on any of their social media pages, you see that they are very engaged in politics, and that the politics that they're engaged in just doesn't reflect the state of Louisiana. This is it's a populist state, granted. It's probably more red than blue, but a lot of these issues that they engage in are very, very, very hard blue. And in New Orleans, for example, we see UTNO, which is the teachers union in New Orleans. They have been co-sponsoring a number of events alongside the Democratic Socialists of America. And maybe I wouldn't say people are monoliths. People follow their parties lockstep. Some people do. I don't necessarily. There's some things I agree with, some things that I don't disagree with. But I'm telling you, if I saw an organization that I have to pay dues to, and their name was next to the Democratic Socialists of America,
Right.
or some sort of Israel-hating organization, I'd be pretty upset about it, and I would want out now.
Yeah. So what's interesting still to me is that it's hard for them to opt out now. And this legislation would give them the option to opt out. And we've talked about do they have that much control over when people are in? But the problem is, is there a way to uncover the behind the scenes? And the answer is probably no, but I'm gonna let you explain as I go into this little idea a little bit here. When behind the scenes, these labor unions might say, oh, there's a law that says they can opt out, but we can make sure we make it really difficult for them if they do opt out. Is there anything that can be uncovered behind the scenes with this legislation? Do you follow where I'm going with this?
I do, and that's a very tough veil to pierce. These organizations are not exactly transparent. You can see a little bit about where their money goes. Not all of them are big enough to file certain documents called an L2, so you can see where their money goes. So it's a very hard nut to crack. Last year, one of the heads of the teachers unions was testifying that you can leave at any time. If you were just a member of their organization and not necessarily one of the collective bargaining parishes, you just wanted to be a member. So we tried that. We actually went onto their website and we created a mock profile of just a random teacher. And we clicked on it and we read their fine print. And it's not at all what that leader was saying. You had to pay your dues and you were still considered a member until I think August 31st of the following year.
Until death do you part.
Man, we know that it's tough, and we know from other states that maybe you have to send your things to a PO box. Freedom Foundation does excellent work with opt out and getting people out of their contracts, and they provide free legal services because this is really more difficult than it should be. So sometimes there'll be a phantom PO box. Sometimes they will intercept mail that they see has come from the Freedom Foundation. I know a couple of years ago, an organization called A+ Educators of Louisiana, they were trying to provide an incentive to teachers in Vermilion Parish. And someone at that parish, I think this is like 2016, 2014, 2016, sometime around then, it's still on the interwebs, you can look it up. Someone in the parish destroyed their mail. So A+ Educators is not a teachers union, but they provide a lot of the benefits that a teachers union would provide, so they could be considered a competitor. And Vermilion Parish is a collective bargaining parish. So they did not want their teachers to see that there is an alternative out there, even one that is less expensive, that doesn't engage in politics and provides a lot of the same services. So if you want to remain a member, that's great. If you are satisfied with the service that they're providing to you, wonderful. If you agree with how they're spending your dues money, more power to you. But for someone who fundamentally disagrees with their money being used for politics, that they don't agree with, and you are trapped paying dues, that is a violation of the First Amendment. Janice says you can't do it. And we just want people to be able to control their paychecks, control their lives, and control their speech.
And not have to be a member of an organization. So is this legislation as simple as that the labor union cannot require them to be a member if they work in any organization that has a union? Is it that simple?
It's that simple. It is simple.
So how did it get stopped last year, and what can you think you can do this year to get it passed? Can you reveal that secret?
We're having some conversations about the strategy that we're going to, the approach that we're going to take this year. It passed both houses last year, and the word is escaping me. Concurrence, when it was going to be concurred. Yeah. There's a committee that was put together the composition of that committee was intended to kill the bill, and that's exactly what happened. But it passed overwhelmingly in both houses. It's a popular reform. People are if you want to force people to be a part of your organization, that tells me that you're not providing them a service and that people want out.
Forget if it was Alexis de Tocqueville or Adam Smith, one of their books they wrote that power lies. There's a little a little note or whatever. One thing that they say is that power lies in the committees. Mm-hmm. And what you just now talked about is how these little committees get formed to kill mm-hmm. good legislation, or even in this case popular legislation that's meant to help people, and it gets killed in some committee that that gets created by somebody else, and we'll leave it there. So I love the strategy. Yep. I love the concept, and so we'll put that one on the shelf and talk about something else that you're working on, which is coastal erosion on the coastal mm-hmm. lawsuit. And what I like to tell my national listeners, I always like to tell them, hey, I talk about things in Louisiana regularly, but oftentimes things that happen here are a reflection of what's going on in other states and around our country. In this case, somebody might say, well, how does coastal erosion affect us? But I always say that Louisiana being such a big port city, to our country, and that our coast provides so much in the way of oil and gas revenues, coastal erosion here hurts the Louisiana economy in a way that can affect the United States in other ways. So this coastal erosion thing that you're working on, I'd like to talk about it a little bit more in depth for not only local Louisianians, but on a national basis too.
Sure. The issue, what is being alleged in the lawsuits, you're correct, is that the oil companies caused coastal erosion. Did they or didn't they? That's an issue that's going to be heard by a jury. The question right now is who gets to hear it? Who gets to decide it? Is it a state court in Louisiana, or is it a federal court? And that's the issue that the Supreme Court heard in oral arguments this past Monday. I was there. I got to go into the Supreme Court and listen to the advocates argue. The Chevron argued that these cases belong in federal court, and we agree. This is the work that Chevron did was done at the instruction of the federal government, at the request of the federal government. Your listeners know, I'm sure, World War II started September 1st, 1939. After World War I ended, the U.S. people thought this was going to be the war to end all wars, right? Let's wind down our military. We'll stop so heavily investing in preparedness and being ready for the next big thing. And the next big thing, it came. It was World War II. And we had a lot of catching up to do in support of our allies and in our own defense after Pearl Harbor was attacked. So we had to produce tremendous amounts of avgas, aviation fuel, to power our planes to fight in World War II. So the government approached producers like Chevron, which is a vertically integrated company. They take the oil out of the ground and they refine it themselves. And they said, hey, we need you to make avgas. And Chevron said, absolutely, we are here in service of our country. We're going to do that. So they started digging, they started extracting oil in Louisiana. brought the crude to the refineries to be turned into avgas, and we won the war in 1945. And then we need to fast forward to 1978. And in 1978, Louisiana passed its state and local coastal management scheme, SCLRMA. And SCLRMA is, it says that if you're drilling, you are responsible for cleaning up your mess, which is perfectly reasonable. It also grandfathered in activity that had been done in the past that was lawfully permitted. Now we have to make another jump to 2012, 2013. We start seeing these coastal lawsuits being filed. And these lawsuits allege that the oil companies that had done this work in support of the war effort at the direction of federal officers in World War II, the lawsuits allege that SCLRMA does not apply because, they can't be grandfathered in because the drilling was not done, it was not commenced lawfully. There was a game of ping pong over the years. The Chevron wanted these suits to be heard in federal court. The parishes and the state wanted them to be heard in state court before state court juries. So we went back and forth a little bit. There were appeals to the Fifth Circuit. And finally, this question reached the U.S. Supreme Court on Monday. And so we'll have a decision probably sometime this summer. I heard the arguments. I don't know if you were given a chance to got a chance to listen to them. You can check them out on supremecourt.gov. You're able to listen to the archived arguments. And if I'm Chevron, I wouldn't bet like my house on it, but I'd put $1,000 on Chevron being successful.
What I love is that this is not your first rodeo at the Supreme Court. This is not that you've already had one victory via the Pelican Institute and your hard work there at the Supreme Court many years ago. So I have a feeling, like you say, that you're going to be successful with Chevron also, on this one too. I'm looking forward to hearing.
I think so. And the question before the Supreme Court is who gets to decide? Is it an impartial jury pool that's pulled from a region, not necessarily a small town, or as you're aware, as your listeners are aware, I'm sure, a federal judge has lifetime tenure. They are insulated from a lot of the pressures like re-election, fundraising. They are selected by the president with advice and consent by the Senate, or an elected hometown judge whose campaign coffers are filled by the very attorneys who are bringing these coastal lawsuits, who have these arrangements with this. They have an arrangement with the state called a joint defense agreement, where the state will not, and the private party, the private attorneys will not disclaim any defenses, which is an unusual arrangement. You have a fee shifting arrangement, which means that the judge gets to decide what is fair. So all of these nuclear verdicts, that money, it sounds great if you are from that parish, but you have to understand that money doesn't go to the coast. This is going in somebody's pocket, probably a lot of it. And also this isn't necessarily a cash payment. A lot of these settlements are in credits, coastal credits. We saw the Freeport-McMoran settlement a few years ago that there was some cash, and there was the rest of it was to be in credits. And these credits really, they don't materialize. The settlement, I don't even think the legislature has actually passed the legislation that puts up like a framework for the settlement to take effect. So this money, like they got their $100 million in cash, but then Freeport's probably running away from it. They've pulled out stakes from Louisiana. They've moved their headquarters to Phoenix. They're not here anymore. So it's a question of fairness. It's like if the Saints had to play all of their home games in Atlanta, that's not fair.
Right.
So it's a question of fairness, and like you said, that this is also a national issue. And there are two things that I would tell you about that. First, there was a really great brief, an amicus brief that was filed by the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they emphasized that this is a national security issue. All of this work was done in support of the war effort. And we want companies, we want to incentivize them to say yes. We want to make it easy for them to
Right.
say yes when their country calls upon them. We don't want Chevron or whoever else to say, you know what, I need to think about this, because in the
The last time
future,
we did this, we had a 30-year lawsuit.
yeah, exactly. Last time we did this 80 years ago,
Yeah, right.
we had a 30-year lawsuit.
Right, right.
We don't want somebody to say, maybe in the future there's going to be this state legislature somewhere that picks on a politically unpopular sector of the economy and says, I've really got this budget hole I need to fill, and I don't want to raise taxes. Let's go after these guys. The other thing that I would say why this is a national issue is administrations change, priorities change. Right now, we do have a president who supports American energy dominance. So in some states, the energy sector is going to be unpopular. Blue states, the energy sector is going to be unpopular. But when there's a new president, new governor, what are their priorities going to be? Or what industries do they hate?
Right.
We've seen this before in the gun space. There have been states that want to go after manufacturers for their products doing what they are designed to do.
Right.
And of course, there can be negligent operators. There can be people who use their products inappropriately. But ultimately, a weapon is for self-defense. And if I need to use my weapon in my own defense, that's what it's intended to do. And you shouldn't come after me for exercising that right.
Which I've been there, and I've had to do that.
God, I know.
Yeah,
but what's the next thing? What's going to be the deep-pocketed, unpopular industry when the pendulum swings? And they're a lawful industry, and they deserve a fair shot too.
And there's two other things that I want to highlight that you've pointed out. Is one, when you look at how much money is involved in these lawsuits, it's not this is going beyond like what's right for the country or what's right for the individuals. This is going to something where businesses, our government, where individuals who are profiting off this have learned that the best way, oftentimes the best way to win the fight isn't by going through the legislative process, it's by going through the judicial process. And,
Yes.
Where judges, and I don't want to use the word jurisprudence because I've been corrected on when I've used that wrong, but where courts get too much power, and courts and judges get more, where these individual judges are getting a lot of power, because of these lawsuits that have been created, or because of these lawsuits, they've been able to rise in power because of their decisions. I'm getting a little feedback there when I talk here, but if my listeners are hearing some static, I'll see if I can try to get that down a little bit. And so, as a result, the courts just keep getting more and more powerful in this. But something else, and then also, like you said, they're not getting it in cash; they're getting it in tax credits. But aren't they selling those tax credits, or can't they sell those same credits later for cash? That's the second thing I'll let you comment on in a second. And then the third thing, real quick, is a lot of people blame the oil companies for all the dredging. But in defense of the oil companies, I did some background, and in Louisiana, the logging industries created a lot of these canals before the oil companies did, and the oil companies just went into the logging industry's canals that they were using to pull cypress trees out of our swamp too. So the oil companies just kind of capitalized off of the damage that the logging industry did initially. I'll let you go with that.
Sure. So to your first point, separation of powers. Our country is set up 3 co-equal branches of government, but it's the executives, as your listeners are well aware, I'm sure, it's the executive enforces the law, Congress makes the law, the courts interpret the law. The court doesn't write the law, and it's like the goal of these lawsuits is to bypass the legislative process and ask the court to do something that the legislature is unwilling or unable to do. To your second point, which was, remind me.
Oh, the tax credits being able to be sold.
The tax credits. Okay. It's the way that the Freeport settlement was set up. It was you sold credits for future projects that may or may not materialize. It wasn't necessarily. I don't think it works quite like the movie tax credit system, but you sell credits for projects in the future, and those projects, they might not materialize. And if I, like, as you might have guessed, sometimes I do bet. And if I were a betting person, I would not bet on those projects materializing, because these companies are smart enough to say, why in the world would I do business in Louisiana if I'm just going to get hauled into court by these trial lawyers?
Right.
That's stupid. That's exactly why they're not here in the first place.
Right.
I mean, that's why, these lawsuits have cost us a tremendous amount in jobs, revenue, investment. That's money people spend at grocery stores. These are people who send their kids to school. The moving vans are not coming this way. They're just leaving.
Right.
So those credits for future projects, they're not materializing because those projects just aren't coming.
And then the last thing is the logging industry. What I found in some research was initially responsible for digging a lot of the canals that they blame coastal erosion on. And then after you answer that, I have something else to throw at you, but go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't know that about the logging industry, but I do know a lot of, and I have a very surface level of understanding about the erosion issue, but it's not from the drilling, from what I understand. It's from other activity, not necessarily logging, but sometimes just that's how nature works. That's how the Mississippi River works. I think there was some issue with the dredging. So it's for a jury to just, it's a question of fact for a jury to decide, and they can look at the same information. But I don't think that you can point to the oil and gas industry, whether it's logging, whether it's nature, or whether it's some other process, that this is billions and billions and billions of dollars of damage caused by the production of oil.
Well, it's a lot of people will point to coastal erosion as being something that the oil companies did, or for whatever reason, but more argument, like I said, that there's more evidence that when I researched, the logging industry was the first ones to dig the actual canals back into the swamp to get to access cypress trees. And then the oil companies just came in behind them using a lot of those same canals. And of course, they ended up digging their own. But the other thing is, the oil companies get blamed for coastal erosion. But I'd also like to point out that the federal government is more responsible for coastal erosion simply because they dammed up all the levees.
Sure,
if you read the book The Rising Tide, you'll find out the history of the Army Corps of Engineers and how powerful the Army Corps of Engineers have become off the bureaucratic system and the federal money to build levees. And now we find that, when you dam up levees, you lose a lot of the natural land building mechanism that the earth had before, when spillover from the rivers created more land. And now that we've dammed up the rivers, or the federal government dammed up the rivers, we've lost that ability to replenish our coast also. So even more reason it should be a federal issue. But and you can comment on that also, but also, how does carbon capture play into this? The oil companies leaving or coming and going, and can we tie in those tax credits to any of that? Is there any connection there? And I'm not asking you whether you're for or against it. I'm just asking you if there's any connections.
No idea. I'm out of my depth on that one.
That's okay. We're just seeing how some of these tax credits for that are playing out with the oil industry. But let's jump to the next subject. We've got you're also working on a lawsuit for a community in Louisiana, which I think is really not only impactful for business and industry in this area, but could also be something that could be looked at on a nationwide level.
Sure, absolutely. The lawsuit that you're talking about is GAO versus the Louisiana State Board of Cosmetology. It's not quite a lawsuit yet. A couple of years ago, the Pelican Institute was involved in passing a law that we like to call right to earn a living. As you're probably aware, Louisiana has, I think, 500 boards and commissions. Some of those are occupational licensing boards. A lot of those boards are staffed by people who are appointed by the governor, And there's, in some cases, a requirement that the people who fill those boards have to be affiliated in some way with a certain profession. There are very few boards. I don't know if there are any boards in Louisiana that have a requirement that you have a consumer member on those boards. So we have capture of all of these boards that regulate, I think 70 or so occupations in Louisiana. So in order to do a job that is perfectly lawful in Louisiana, to get your hair cut, to be a lawyer, to be an auctioneer, to formerly, not any longer, but to be a florist, you used to have a permission slip from the government to do that job. These jobs, like they're not dangerous for the most part. And sure, you have to have some skill and some training, but the hoops that we make people jump through in order to work in this state are ridiculous. Other states have really gotten ahead, and they have recognized that we make it hard for people to work and to earn a living, and that they need to get out of people's way when there isn't a health, safety, welfare, or fiduciary component to that job.
Right.
Hair braiding is a perfect example. 37 states have eliminated the licensing requirement for a hair braider. Some states just require you to show that you are well versed in sanitation. You can keep a tidy and clean salon, that you're not that you don't transmit diseases, that you're not hurting anybody. But for the most part, the market does a perfectly fine job of regulating these professions. If you don't like the lady who did your hair or the man who did your hair, don't go back to that person.
Right.
Who hasn't had a bad haircut?
Right.
We don't need an occupational licensing board to bust in on people.
I had a bad haircut one time. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. We don't need 37 states have decided that we don't need that. People who are braiding hair have learned how to do it. Typically, and the people who we've spoken to, a lot of them have learned how to do hair in Africa. They learned how to do hair in their home country. They came to the U.S. This is a skill that they have where they could easily hit the ground running, go to work, instant clientele. And the state says, no, you need to do 500 hours of cosmetology school in order to braid hair. There are, I think I looked at a map, and I tried to match up where the population centers were and where the schools that offered hair braiding were. And I think it's been a minute since I looked at this, so I could be wrong, but there was definitely a part of the state. I think it's the western part of the state. If you were from Lake Charles and you wanted to do hair, you are better off just crossing the border and working in Texas, because there aren't cosmetology schools that teach hair braiding, those 500 hours of hair braiding that are required to braid someone's hair. But the point is, we make it very difficult and costly for people to work. So you have to get a permission slip from the government to do your job. And in Louisiana, and probably in a lot of other states as well, there are a disproportionate number of mostly women who are manicurists who are of Vietnamese origin. They either came from Vietnam or they came here. They're descended from people who came from Vietnam. But a lot of manicurists are Vietnamese. And when you go to a cosmetology board meeting, every month there's a docket of people who are on the naughty list. They did something wrong. And I'll point out that these are not consumer generated complaints. This is the board busting in on just a nail salon just operating on it during the day and doing someone's nails, and they check.
I didn't realize there was a nail mafia also, but go ahead.
There's a nail mafia. Yes, it's the cosmetology board. So it's when you look at the docket for a cosmetology board meeting, their monthly meetings, nearly all of the surnames of the people who are being called before the board are Vietnamese. A lot of these women, they're mostly women, and in our case, all of our plaintiffs are women. So I'm going to go with women. They come to the U.S. They are doing nails. There are no complaints, no consumer complaints about the quality of their work. Nobody's complaining that the salon is dirty, or they're getting any sort of diseases, or their nails are cut too short, or anything like that. But they were all fined for maybe having an expired license, or their license. I think it was mostly expired licenses. There's seven of these women who are representing. And a lot of these women, either English is their second language, or their English isn't very strong. So you get a letter from the government that says you have to pay this fine. You're probably just going to pay it so that it'll go away, because you don't want any more trouble. You don't know who to ask or how to ask, or maybe your English isn't good enough. And so you just pay the fine. If you want to appeal the fine, you appeal the fine to the Cosmetology Board. So the Cosmetology Board is judge, jury, and executioner. You don't have a right to a jury trial. So what we asked the board to do is, pursuant to the right to earn a living law that we helped pass a few years ago, is we asked the board, do these women, if they've been fined, how do they appeal? Do they have a right to a jury trial for these fines? We haven't gotten an answer from them, anything official yet, in writing. So we're kind of waiting on to see what happens. But we believe that these women have, the Seventh Amendment has not been incorporated, which is the right to a jury trial, hasn't been incorporated against the states. Louisiana hasn't adopted it yet. So what we want to know is whether for a civil penalty, or a penalty from imposed by a licensing board, if those people have the right to a trial by jury. So we'll see. We're waiting.
What I found really interesting that you're pointing out here is, I always talk about where we're losing freedom in America. And a lot of people don't see where we're losing freedom in America, because they're not taking freedoms away. They're just heavily regulating our freedoms. And what I noticed the Pelican Institute is doing here in Louisiana, and has been a wave of momentum, we'll say, across the country and other states, is that we're realizing that all this licensing stuff is not only is it burdensome, on an individual, it takes away from economic freedom, which is something else that I know that the Pelican Institute is working on. What other pieces of economic freedom are you all working on that are kind of in the same realm that you might want to point out today?
Well, one of the things that I'm looking at, last year in it was 2025.
Yeah.
Getting our dates all
well, remember, on our check now is 2026.
Oh, you're writing checks?
Yeah.
No, I make that joke, but William, I have to write a check to the Sewage and Water Board, because otherwise, if you leave it up to them, they'll take out $2,000 of your account.
Well, exactly. Well, they'll tell you that you owe for a year. But we're going to. But I am bringing that up in a second after you finish answering that question about something that involves economic freedom with that. But go ahead.
Yeah, last 2025, the Governor Landry issued an executive order, and he asked all of the licensing boards to respond to that request, to respond to a request for information. How is your board complying with the right to earn a living law? Are you advertising it? Also, something called the Welcome Home Act is another piece of legislation that we supported. If you have an occupational license in another state and the requirements for that license are fairly similar in Louisiana, we honor that license. It's a reciprocity. We don't make you jump through all of these hoops to get licensed in Louisiana. We're not going to make you go back to school for something that you've already been educated on and have been practicing in for years. If you have a clean disciplinary record, then we're going to let you work. We're going to put you to work. So the governor's office asked all the licensing boards, how are you complying with this law? And so I did a public records request, and I got just a dump of documents from these licensing boards. And I'm digging into it. I'm still working on it. It's taken me a while to go through this. And I'm learning some boards, like there was one board in particular, she attached the minutes from their past board meetings. And it sounds like there's like all this tea in these documents. You wouldn't think that there was, but it sounds like a former chair, like absconded with the money. And it turns out like there's only 30 people licensed in this particular occupation. So I'm like, why do we need this? So I think there's a good opportunity for us to look, like we discussed earlier, look at what other states have done. Arizona, for example, does a really tremendous job with this. You have to justify your reason for existence. This isn't just a board for you to get on for you to get LSU tickets or something. You need to say that this board serves a purpose. It exists. It protects the public. And I don't think every single board can say that. And I'm really seeing that in these documents. I don't understand the money maybe that we pay to support these boards, because there are costs associated with running a board. There's per diems that are paid to the members for their travel, for their expenses. I don't think that they can justify their existence. So I think we need to take a look at who's on these boards. We need to make sure that there are consumer members on the boards. The boards need to make their meetings as transparent as possible. They should be live streamed. There's no reason in 2026 why I have to drive to Baton Rouge every week. I mean, I'm sorry, not every week. God, no. Every month and sit in the cosmetology board meeting when the miracle of technology allows, there's FaceTime on Facebook. My goodness.
So are you watching a momentum across the country to get rid of these boards, for one? But how many more boards do you think that in Louisiana? I don't want to say you or the Pelican Institute, but how many more boards in Louisiana should we even go after and say, hey, look, there's not a need for you. You're actually, because while these boards may be independent in their right to exist, they are actually wrapping all of their how shall we say, their licensure requirements are wrapped up in a way that it affects our local economies and even our state economies, of course, our national economy for that matter. But how much more unwrapping is there to do?
I'd say get rid of all of them. Get rid of all of them and start from the beginning.
Freedom!
Get rid of them all. Yes.
I love it. I love it.
But the thing is, William, whenever you have these boards that have people in the industry on the board, they are incentivized to keep out their competition. So that's fewer, that's fewer people who can provide this type of service. That's fewer people who, funerals. I'm looking into some regulations right now related to funeral homes and funeral service providers. That's burial and death is expensive. As if you've ever planned a funeral, you've got to you have a lot of decisions to make. You have to bury the person. You have to buy a casket, which you can buy from a monk if you like, or Costco even. But the people who are providing these services,
and where they were getting regulated too, weren't the monks who were making that? Where they were trying to regulate them, right?
Yeah, they were. And that's one of the things that was in the Fifth Circuit opinion. You can buy a casket from Costco. You don't have to have a casket. I mean, you don't have to.
They were trying to regulate the monks. I mean, why regulate the monks on a casket? You can't hurt a dead person, can you? I mean,
they're dead. It's not a lot much worse can happen.
Right, exactly. But I love the removal of all the boards. But I want to jump to something really quick. And if you want to talk about the boards more, we can. But when we joked about me writing checks, which I still do, but we talked about that. And we talked about the Sewage and Water Board. Mm-hmm. A lot of bureaucratic agencies now will not allow you to pay by cash or checks. They've taken away some of their payment centers. There's different variations. And while some people go, oh, gosh, writing checks is old school. Going in there and paying at the counter with cash is old school. We should be paying with credit card. But the problem is a lot of these bureaucratic agencies are now requiring people to pay a fee. So you have to pay by credit card, and then you have to pay the credit card fee. So your bills are essentially going up, based on the fees. But that's just because they're removing cash. Is there any way to fight this?
I'm not. That is a little bit
new at you. I know, right?
I know. I had never thought about that. There's a 30 Rock episode where Liz Lemon goes to a convenience store. She drives by a candy bar with a $100 bill. And she says that the clerk wants to reject it. And she says, it says on this bill that this is good for all debts. This is legal tender for all debts. So I don't know. It's something I hadn't really thought about.
Yeah, it's something to consider. There's a lot of there's a lot of agencies and departments around the state, like in Natchitoches. If you try to pay your property taxes in Natchitoches, you have to pay them online, and then they charge you a fee. It's like a percentage of your taxes are the fee to pay by credit card. It's the same with the Sewage and Water Board in Natchitoches Parish and a couple other ones. So if you pay your property taxes, your utility bills, or whatever, you have to pay a fee to use the credit card, but they don't have a payment place to send a check into. And I might have it. I might not be perfectly correct on that, but I'm seeing it all over the place. I think Jefferson Parish is now doing some of these things. I mean, that's another chip into our economic freedom in a small way. Might be something to put on the Pelican Institute's radar.
I have a card that gives me a certain percentage on all my purchases, so I just make sure that I use that one. But I know not everybody has that luxury, and I know not everybody has a credit card.
Right.
So it's I get it. I feel it. It's a tough one.
So let's as we wrap up and walk out of the interview here, I want to ask a couple more questions on things that you might want to highlight in the upcoming Pelican Summit, and a couple of the highlights that you're working on. We've talked about what you're working on in the Louisiana legislative session indirectly. I didn't point out that that's some of these things are going to be in session, but is there anything that you want to point out that's coming up in the session that you are working on, just in brief to highlight it, and also in what you're going to be talking about at the summit?
Sure. It's, as you're 2026 it's not a budget session, it's an open session. So there are unlimited bills, unlimited chaos is what I like to say. Obviously, government union reform is going to be one of my priorities. Regulatory reform. I had a legislator contact me and he asked me for the most ridiculous occupational licensing requirements, anything silly from any of the boards that we might want to change or get rid of. And so I'm going to tackle that. I've got a stack sitting just to my left that's off camera. So I'm excited about that. Solution Summit is always just one of the highlights of our year. We're going to be talking, I'll be moderating panels on regulatory reform, obviously, and on government labor reform. My colleagues will, of course, be moderating panels on energy, education, all the great things that we work on at the Pelican Institute. It's going to be a great summit. America 250 is what we'll be celebrating. I'm excited about it. It's in March. I hope your listeners will sign up. I do have to plug that as an attorney, I do offer, I will be submitting an application, but historically we've offered between 4 and 6 hours of in-person continuing legal education credit for free. And it's a great day. It's a great event. It's always been just a highlight of the year for us. And we're excited to put it on this year, and we're excited to see you there.
I didn't know that you're offering the CLUs for for the attorneys. Do they have to buy a ticket to the summit to go to the summit, and then they get their their continuing education with the by attending the summit? You
turn in your little card at the end, and I tell the Bar Association you were there, and you get your CLE credits.
But they have to buy a ticket. But they have to buy a ticket to the summit still, and all right.
You have to register, but CLE is free. It's free.
Gotcha. Oh, awesome. Okay. Yeah. So I always plug the summit because I got to tell you, whenever I go there, it's a 1-day summit. And that's what I appreciate about it is it's not like it's a 2 or 3 day event. We have to go, we got a hotel room, and you can go there and like the classes or the speeches or the presentations as they may be are very concise. And not only do they keep their speeches short and very informative, but they engage with the audience a whole lot. And I learned so much just about not only about policy in general, but just about other things that's going on in our state as a reflection of what's happening in our country. And, Sarah, I hope people go to that. Sarah, is there any final words, any parting words that you want to talk to people, tell anybody about before we leave?
I think we've covered just about everything. I hope to see everybody at Summit. It's going to be great.
I want to ask you one last question to ask Daniel on the way out. Or the last question, it's an easy one. Is freedom on the rise in Louisiana, or are we still having to fight hard for it in Louisiana?
We're fighting hard for it every day because it's worth it. And if I have anything to do with it, it's going to be on the rise.
I love it. Sarah, thank you so much. Hang in there 1 second while I ask everybody to please not only share the episode with somebody in Louisiana that you think might want to either be involved or be more aware of what's happening in our state as a reflection of what's happening in our country, but please share the interview in general. And I thank you so much for your time. We have another interview coming up soon here, so hang in tight. Thank you so much. Have a great day.